If you've been thinking that you want to start your own podcast, consider this your sign and your permission slip. I'm Sarah Heater, your host of Big Brave Business, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Podfox Media. We're a podcast production and strategic consultation company, and we've helped launch almost 100 shows and consulted on hundreds more. In 2024 and beyond, there are so many choices out there for podcast editors or managers or even production teams. But the difference when you work with Podfox Media is that you get access to not just our strategic support, and believe me, we are some of the best in the business, but also our core values. And that's something that I know if you've been listening to Big Brave Business for a while, you are well familiar with. If you know you want to work with a team that has your back and is actively working to change the world through revolutionary podcasting, working with thought leaders in a ton of different industries whose voices might be underrepresented in their communities or their industries or in podcasting, because let's be honest, it's a middle-aged white dude's game. That sounds like the kind of team and the kind of environment you want to be part of and you want to have behind you to get your podcast off the ground. We will help you every step of the way. Schedule your 100% free 90-minute launch strategy session with me or someone from my team at launchmyshow.com. That'll also be linked in the show notes, but it's launchmyshow.com. Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I'm your host, Sarah K. Heater. Big Brave Business is a podcast where we challenge the status quo of traditional business practices. So if you're ready to challenge norms, rewrite the rules, and redefine what it means to lead with courage and integrity, then grab a notebook and let's dive in. Welcome back to the Big Brave Business Podcast. I am so excited to have my friend Lisa back on the podcast again. If you don't remember Lisa Zawrotny, she is a productivity and accountability coach, founder of Positively Productive Systems, and host of the Positively Living podcast. And she was on the show a couple months ago at this point, talking about overachieving as a piece of our identity and just overachieving in general and how we can be really positively productive, which is your whole platform, right? So we had a great conversation about that, and I knew there's just a ton of other things we could talk about, and I knew I wanted to have you back because I think we always have really good, deep conversations where we really dig into the meat. But welcome back, Lisa. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you. I am so happy to be back. I feel very lucky to be able to have yet another conversation with you, because you're right. We dive in head first and just go for it. And I think that needs to be done. I think that's something that in day-to-day life, I try so hard not to use the word busy because I'm against it in many respects, but it's true. We get caught up in the flow of life and we don't take the time we really need to stop, to reflect, to think, and you help us do that with these conversations. So I am so grateful to be part of it.
And the same to you on your podcast. So if you're listening to this and you agree and you think that's fun, you definitely need to go check out Lisa's podcast if you haven't already. When we were talking about what we could chat about on today's podcast, and there's so many directions we could go, you were looking at the 4 pillars for the content for Big Brave Business. And you said that institutional interrogation is always one that's going to resonate really deeply with you. And I'm curious if you could share, like, why does that stand out for you?
It stands out because I am a questioner, and I mean that in every sense, including if you're familiar with Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies. And if you're not, you definitely need to check that out. It's one of the assessments that I have my clients do because it speaks so much to how we show up in terms of expectations, inner and outer. And as a questioner, my natural inclination is to say, why are we doing things this way? Why does that need to be done? It's the phrase that she uses is, if you tell me why, I'll comply. It's this natural tendency to be like, I won't do it on principle. I won't do it just because you said so. I want to question it. And that actually works really well for me to be a coach for others because I can help them ask why.
Mm.
And so I love that it's one of your pillars, because too often, and it goes back to what we just talked about, which is that the flow of life, the busyness, the day to day that we live in, we just keep going. And how often do we step back? Do we reflect and do we ask? And even when we go to take action, taking action is something we need to do. It's something that's praised by so many people, right? And with good reason, because that's how you get things done. But sometimes we forget that we need to stop and think what's the best way to take action for us, not just to take action, because sometimes action without intention can then become more clutter in our lives, more busy
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. It's like wearing busy as a badge of honor. And that's something that, and I've probably talked about this on the podcast a couple of times, but it's been really revolutionary for me, which is this idea that hard work is inherently a virtue. That,
Mm,
some of the people who are the busiest and will tell you, they'll be the first ones to tell you how busy they are not actually the most productive. And so
right.
efficiency balanced with effectiveness or efficacy is going to be way more, in my opinion, of something to aspire to than just inherently being a hard worker. Now, I am a hard worker, but I like to do both. I like to be efficient, effective, and work hard because I can get so much more done if I'm effective, efficient, and I'm working hard. But you can work hard without being efficient or effective, right?
Definitely. We touched upon this in our last conversation. We dug into the why behind being the overachiever, right?
Yeah.
But behind the sort of the tendency or what drives us to end up in that busy trap.
Yeah.
And so it was understanding that there's really a happy medium in there. You can work hard, but
Yeah.
make sure that the hard work that you are making an effort with, right? Like that you're using your energy for is going to actually take you in the direction that you want to go, that you perhaps even still want to go, right?
Yeah. I want to go back to understanding the why
Mm-hmm.
behind what we do and asking why, and also telling each other why, being able to communicate with each other why. There's a lot of directions with why here, but in particular, why that really stood out for me is because I am reading a book called Blue Fishing by Steve Sims.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a section in there called The Three Whys. And I don't know if you know what Blue Fishing. Are you familiar with that book?
I'm not.
Oh,
So
you
this
would
is
love it.
another one to add to my
Yes. Okay.
TBR.
It was recommended to me, and I've heard the person who recommended it to me, a good friend of mine, she has talked about it for many years. So I'm finally reading it. But he helps people dream really big and then make those dreams come true. Singing on stage with the band Journey or going into space or whatever it is, let's think as big as possible. And when people come to him with what they say they want to do, he has a kind of methodology where he asks them why 3 times. And he says, I'm going to try to remember this just off the top of my head. He says the first why is what they think they want. The second why is what they think you want to hear. And the third why is what they really think. It's what they really feel. That's what it is. It's what they really feel. So
Mm.
asking why 3 times gets really to the heart of what do they really feel. And I'm so fascinated by this and I can't wait to try it out because in my brain, this makes so much sense that yes, we all operate under assumptions. We have assumptions about why we do things or how things work. And asking the second why, we feel like, especially in a situation where like you're working with a client and they feel like they need to be an A student at being a client, I'm going to be an A student in this client relationship, that it makes sense that the next thing would be what they think you want to hear or what they think. I would even go so far as to say what they think the correct answer is. And
Mm-hmm.
then the third why being, this is what I really feel about this. And I just think that's really powerful and I can't wait to implement that.
I actually really love this. I definitely am adding this book to my list, but I will say that by nature, being someone who asks why, who questions a lot, that I've already gone there and gone there with clients. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And I've definitely worked with those who want to get a really good grade on the client side of things.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
understand what you're saying. And it makes sense too, because I think so often we have been trained by society, by our culture, right? Because the first thing is that, or at least the first couple of times, you have to have an answer that you think people will agree with, or that sounds good, or and when you dig down to the heart of the matter, I, that changes everything about how you are going to go about implementing whatever it is that you wanted to do, as well as maybe even deciding if you actually really wanted to do it. That's why I love questioning. And I have definitely asked clients this in the context of their goals, for sure. So we've done this, but also in the context of figuring out like what you would expect standard productivity things to be. Like,
Yeah.
how do we want to manage your calendar? What kind of habits are you going to implement in order to achieve this goal? How do you want to keep a list? It's like, whatever it is that we're trying to do, it all comes down to creating a habit and doing things in a specific way. I can immediately sense when a client is, I don't know about that, because I'll throw out ideas, I mean, it's not just coaching, it's sometimes consulting. I've seen this is an
Hmm.
option. This might be a platform that could be used that works in this way. And we explore together, like, what could work for you? And I can feel the resistance if I say, in order to achieve goal B, you have to take step A. And I can see them like freeze up, and we have to explore. Why did you freeze up at that? So one of two things has to happen. Either you have some kind of mindset surrounding that you need to work through, actually take that step, or you need to honor what's making you react that way and say, that's not the way for me to go. It's so interesting. I talk a lot about what I consider productivity mindset in the productivity space, because everyone always goes so quickly to the, let's talk about techniques. Could you discuss the Eisenhower matrix? I could, but none of that is going to make a difference until we understand what you think of yourself, what you believe, and really what matters to you.
Yeah. And I think this applies to every decision that we make. Probably you could just end the sentence there, every decision that we make. But I was
Yeah.
going to say every decision that we make in our business, right?
Yeah.
And as you come into business and you've never run a business before, as you come in as an entrepreneur and you're like, okay, I'm going to start this, you have to learn what to do somewhere, right? Like it does feel really overwhelming to just say you can literally just offer something, could be a service or a product, and just charge people money for it. And as long as you have a privacy policy and terms of service or terms of purchase, you can literally just collect money for doing things. That is really a lot. But what am I supposed to do? But how am I supposed to do it? How am I supposed to get that out there? And I think we find a place where we start to learn, and that's going to shape a lot of our perspective of this is how it's supposed to be done, especially if as we diversify where we're learning, if there's a lot of repeated things, which of course in kind of business coaching, there's a lot of repeated things over and over. I need to build an email list. I need to have a website. I need to show my face on social media, and I need to raise my prices. Those are pretty much like the standard things that I feel like every business coach is talking about. Okay. So then you just go about things that way. But it is interesting to look back and interrogate everything you do and why you do it the way that you do it, and then to be open to the fact that there could be a better way. And yet also, if there are people who have gone before you and figured something out, you don't have to start from scratch. You can use their wisdom. I heard this referred to from Alex Hermosi in $10 Million Leads, another book I've been reading a lot. He said, you can share the story without the scar, right? So if you're learning from somebody who's gone before you, you get their story without having to have their scars. And I think there is something to be said for learning from other people who have gone before you and figured something out. So how do you know? And I guess for you personally, how do you know when you hear advice about how you're supposed to do something, how something's supposed to be done, even if they can explain to you why? How do you know if it's right for you?
I love this question because, yes, there is definitely an opportunity to fast track like how you make a decision, right? And a very natural thing, and questioners do this all the time, is okay, I don't have to reinvent the wheel here. I don't have to start with research from square one here. I can find someone whom I trust, a trusted resource, and take information from that trusted resource. So some of the legwork has been done. I can do it that way. But I think what you're touching upon is that other side of it, which is not just what's the information you're taking in to make a decision, but also what's the filter in which you, or filters that you have to say, I agree with that. Because I'll tell you right now, there are some techniques that out there that are in fact effective. They're tried and true, and I don't like them. And you and I talk about this all the time. I understand when we say ethical, we've had to define this before, right? We've had to talk about this and what does that actually mean? You and I had an amazing conversation on my podcast about that, right? And so we have to be fair that it's okay, but then it's I'm defining it through my ethical practices, and those are my filters. So that's how I know someone could absolutely say, do this, it works, here's why. And I could be like, great, but that's not for me. And I think that's the distinction. I think that's what you're asking, because you need to figure out, okay, what options do I have? You don't know what you don't know. And that's where you're saying it's great to find other people who've been there, done that. And business is a great example of that, where you have people, you have even your coaches who they're not necessarily out to coach that. Like, I'm a productivity coach, but I can tell you lots of things that I've been through as a business owner.
Sure.
When I started my LLC in 2016, it's been around the block a time or two.
Yeah, I was going to say that
certainly
too.
share things, but that doesn't mean that anything that I share will necessarily apply to you if it doesn't fit your values and the way that you function best. That's why we need to discover what your filters are.
Yeah, it's a hard question, and I think it's something that's obviously like a huge reason why I started this podcast in the first place with Amanda, and then in taking it over with her stepping back, the opportunity to talk to more people and to dig into those things of what do I believe? What do I think? What do I want? It's how I approach leading my own business. And so that's obviously a huge part of what we're even doing here. But the timing is not a coincidence as to when we started this podcast and in the scope of my business, because I really did. I've always been a person who like rebels just a little bit against whatever rules I set. And honestly, I have to say, I rebel against my own rules, not against other people's rules. I'm a Girl Scout, and I go the speed limit and I put my shopping cart away at the store. Like, I've always been that type of person, but for myself, and there's a whole other conversation here, because I also heard a podcast several years ago about the one person you should never break a promise to is yourself. And I'm the only person I will break a promise to. I really rebel against my own rules. I have had to learn not to set rules for myself that I'm not going to follow. Don't even set the rule then. Leave it open to, I'm going to go with your word, a filter in the moment of what feels aligned and what feels right and what matches my priorities and my ethics. And I don't necessarily know what that's going to be ahead of time. So let me make the decision in the moment then, to a certain degree. But when I started my business, there were so many things that, although I did it my own way from day one, there also were things that I was looking to mentors and role models and emulating. I need to do this. I need to do this. This is the step to do this. This is how I have to do this. This is how I'm going to make, at the time when I'm first starting, this is how I'm going to break that 6-figure threshold. This is first of all, 6 figures matters, right? That's like the first assumption, that you have to break 6 figures. That's the goal for a successful business, which is also so funny because how many people are making 6 figures and don't feel like they're successful, right? But regardless, 6 figures is the thing. And then 10K months, which those things do not necessarily align because you make 6 figures before that, but besides the point. And then also, in order to do that, I need to have, originally it was digital courses and then it became memberships. I have to have those things in order to get there. And that's the point. And you do one-to-one to get started, but you only do one-to-one until you have a really good offer that is more passive, and you have to have passive, and you have to have all these different streams of revenue, and you have to. That's like, this is just how you do business. This is just the way you do it. And I know anybody listening who has an online business, which is probably everybody listening, is yes, that's exactly what you have to do. But it is interesting to step back and be like, actually, you don't have to do any of it. But I think, and this is what I guess I'm struggling with, and I struggle with this with myself, because I like to chase shiny objects, and I'm very susceptible to marketing. Very, if I'm at the grocery store and I am waiting in line and they have a display at the checkout that's to get your attention so that you add that last minute thing to your cart, I will put it in my cart. I am that person. So I have trouble sometimes distinguishing when somebody has really good marketing, and that's why I want to have a digital course, because look at how fun this looks, and look at how sexy this looks, and look at how much money I could make, and I'm dreaming of having the most stellar digital course. And then I created a digital course and I hated it. So I wonder, how can you tell the difference between what you actually want and what's actually aligned with you, and really good marketing, a really good sales pitch?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I have an answer. I have many thoughts and feelings. First of all, let's go back for like just a moment to say, yes, it's an entirely like different conversation to talk about promises to yourself and how you might have a tendency, you might have an obliger tendency where you want to serve others. So then it feels okay in your mind somehow to break promises to yourself. There may be
Oh, it's
some
worse,
rebellion,
babe. It's
right?
fun to break promises to myself. It's
Oh.
fun to
Because there are no
overrule myself.
consequences, right? Except for
Only mine.
sabotaging
Oh,
yourself. Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
Oh, yeah. There's some therapy that needs to happen there. I don't know, but yeah.
There's some places to dig in. So all I will say is good for you for acknowledging that and knowing that's a thing. And then saying, okay, what I can do is work on how am I making decisions and how am I approaching things such that maybe I can mitigate the effects of these things. It's so funny that you should mention this because today, and it's like Tip Tuesday in some of the groups that I'm in, I was sharing the idea of having a very flexible time blocking kind of approach. It's something that I do with clients, and I just call it flex blocking as opposed to time blocking because I can see that resistance again with many clients, especially creatives who are like, I don't want to be tied down to this. Don't tell me I have to do it then. And so
Mm.
I have a technique for coming up with what it is that you need to do, understanding kind of what categories those are, and then filling in the blanks depending upon the moment, your energy, how you're feeling today. So if you create an intentional last minute practice of time blocking, if you will, for want of a better way to describe it, then you're not letting yourself down. You're not breaking your own promise because
Yeah.
you haven't made the promise yet. So it's
Yeah.
a tricky little approach.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back though. You were saying, so we've got, tell me again
Yeah.
the question.
How do you know the difference between something you actually want and really good marketing? A really
Yeah.
good sales pitch. Somebody sold me on this and it sounded really
So,
good. So now I
right.
think I
And you
want
know
that.
that's how you are. And so what I will also ask is this. You say you're generally like that, and it's because there's a sort of a bright, shiny object aspect to it. This is where that why, that question of why comes into play. I would be curious to know why you love those bright, shiny objects. Is it, and this is not you specifically, but this is like the kind of spitballing that I would do. Is it a neurodiversity thing where it's, hey, I just love variety. I'm constantly seeking novelty. My brain needs it in order to function and to feel very productive, right? So then if you're constantly seeking novelty, it can be easy to be like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And the biggest drudgery in the world could be staying with what you currently have.
Yeah. Yeah.
As one example. And I do have, you can probably imagine, I do have a lot of clients like that. Then the question starts to be, okay, if I know that's the case and I'm constantly seeking novelty, what I need to do is take that out of the equation and see what's left. If this were the new thing, would what I'm currently doing be preferred if it were brand new? Like, you have to get hypothetical and you have to remove a piece of that, of what's driving me to want the new thing. Sometimes escapism can be that. When you're just really frustrated, when you're tired, when you're weak, it's like, I want carbs because I haven't slept properly. And it's like your weakest is almost a willpower break. So understanding what the reason might be that you're drawn in that direction. Now, just because that may not be the best choice doesn't mean, or should I say, in the moment, for whatever reason, that it may not be the best choice, doesn't mean that it's not a good choice potentially for the future, or for someone else, or even for you, but just not right now. So I guess you have to ask, like, why am I looking at that? Is there a deeper look for the deeper reason? Then also say, all right, if I were to do that, what would that mean? And this kind of goes back to the clutter conversations I always have, is that in traditional clutter maintenance, if you will, there's a guideline that's a one in, one out. So you would like a new dress. You have a dress or another piece of clothing that you're no longer using. So it's no problem to bring something new in, but you have to consider. And then so the same thing with new systems or with new habits or anything. Energetically, you're only going to have so much space. So what are you absolutely ready to give up, and what kind of impact is that going to have? Because sometimes that can at least slow you down if you're like, oh my gosh, all right, if I'm going to have this new email system that I think is really incredible, that means I'm going to have to absolutely replace my other one, which is connected, and all these different, oh my goodness, what's that even going to mean? That's enough to say, okay, slow your roll, Sarah. Wait a minute. This is too much. Is that going to be worth it? And then it will force you into breaking it down. Now, I've done that before. 2 years ago, I completely changed out my email system. Was it a big project? Yes. Was it worth it? Yeah. And it wasn't just an email system. It was an email system and where I store my products.
Yeah, we're doing that right now. I hear you.
But it was worth it in that case.
That's great. I want to do a thing that I feel like I'm going to very quickly become known for on this podcast because I'm watching the time, but I want to respond as far as reflecting on why I chase shiny objects, like what is going on there. I want to answer what I think my answer is, but it is opening a whole can of worms at the very end of the podcast episode. So here we go.
As we do.
I'm gonna do it. And also, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, first of all, thank you. But second of all, this will not surprise you that I'm about to take it here. I think it comes back to capitalism. So I feel like the reason why first of all, why I am even distracted by shiny objects and marketing tactics, like so many of us are, this is why marketing tactics exist. And the really effective ones are effective because people study the chemistry of the brain and psychology and how you're going to respond and create an emotional connection with the marketing that you see. And when we discover a way to do that, we use it in order to get people to buy what we are offering. First of all, that's part of it. Second of all, capitalism, because honestly, like a lot of the things that I chase in my business are chasing, I just don't want to be broke. And so like in the beginning, I don't want to be broke anymore. And now I don't want to be broke ever again. Just please guarantee that I can actually have some semblance of financial stability, which is really fucking hard for most people in capitalism. And I think that most, especially most Americans, I think they say most Americans have less than $1,000 in their checking account, and they are, or maybe it's less than $1,000 in a savings account. I don't know. Anyways, and they have less, or they're one $700 emergency away from bankruptcy, like more than half. And I don't have a source for that because, and so the numbers are probably not exactly right. It's just from remembering things that I read that are credible sources that I don't have off the top of my head. And I hate it when people do that anecdotally. So I'm sorry because I do that on the podcast a lot, but it's something just to paint the picture that, like, if you feel that, if you're listening and you resonate and you feel that, or you have ever felt that, it's not you. It's not you. It's capitalism. And so this dream of you're going to start a digital course, for example, I use that example on this podcast a lot. You're going to start a digital course that's going to make you rich. You're going to figure out how to invest in going to see Tony Robbins, or you're going to have to figure out how to invest in a coach or whatever. And when you figure out how to make that investment, that's going to be the key to unlock the secret to success, that now you're not going to have to hurt anymore. And that's capitalism. That's what it all comes back to, is we're all hurting and craving the magic pill that's going to, the magic bullet, the
magic bullet is exactly what was in my mind. Yeah.
The miracle drug, the snake oil, right? That's going to make it stop hurting. And I think that's really what it, and we're all hurting in some way, right? Whatever that is. And so it might be financial, it might not be financial. I know a lot of the people that you've worked with are like caregivers or things like that. And so what's hurting might not necessarily be financial, but whatever that hurt is, we just want it to feel better. And so we will fork over whatever resources it takes, time, money, attention, whatever, to try to make it stop hurting.
And what you're talking about too, you talk about the hurt, which I think that's so important to pinpoint, because first of all, we all hurt. And so knowing you're not alone is important, but that it is like a natural psychological response. We purchase for pleasure and to remove pain, and more so the latter. And then the other part of it that I was thinking magic bullet when you were describing this, and I was also thinking fear. We base so many of our choices on fear. And I know we have reason to be afraid, and we certainly think that we do, but we also do. I'm acknowledging that, absolutely. But when we are afraid, it is even more important in that moment not to make decisions based on that fear.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. I love this. And again, I know that I am just, my podcast is going to become known for this. We can have a whole conversation going in this direction, but for the sake of time, I don't want to end on fear and pain. So tell me, Lisa, what is something that is making you happy or bringing you joy right now?
Actually, talking about these things, because we have to bring them out into the open. But the thing that I find joy in, even in this moment, and I want you to, as you're listening, I want you to know this, is that we're not alone. That we get to have these conversations together, because that's how we're going to get past this. I love helping people in a way that puts them in this place where it's okay, we can get beyond the fear. I live it too, and I live with so many challenges every single day that can feel heavy, but when we lift it together, it's not so heavy. So that brings me great joy. So thank you for giving me a platform to do this, because I know even too, when I'm feeling the heaviness and then we have a conversation like this, it feels so much lighter.
Yeah. And hopefully you just feel less alone. It can be so isolating to run a business. It's certainly isolating to have fear or pain. That feels very isolating. But running a
and
business
to make these choices,
is,
right?
Yeah, to make decisions, making decisions. And
I always say, yay, I get to make all the
business.
decisions.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, I have to make all the decisions.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
That's leadership. Yeah, I totally hear you on that. And I appreciate you too. And of course your platform as well. And that you're doing kind of this, not the same thing, but your own version of the same purpose over on your podcast. So thank you for that too. Okay, what's making me happy this week? I'm going to say, obviously, I mentioned a couple of books on this podcast. I have been reading a lot. I am super focused in my business. We have some big things some big focus areas right now. I'll just leave it at that for the sake of time. And so I decided I'm going to really do some reading. And I have been taking in a bunch of suggestions from people who I know also love reading, like personal and professional development and business books. And I'm usually pretty picky about what I'll read, especially when it comes to fiction, like what authors I will read and staying away from things that are inherently problematic. I'm trying to do better and retrain my brain to recognize when something's problematic. So I tend to be very picky about what nonfiction I'll read. But the reality is that a lot of the people that I would avoid, they are the books that are the most effective out there. So it fits with this conversation really well. And that's part of why I wanted to use this as what's making me happy. I love reading. But what is interesting is some of these books are getting me fired up, but for two reasons. Sometimes because it is mind blowing and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm going to use that. And sometimes because I think I fundamentally disagree and I find it
Mm,
totally unethical that this is the mainstream thought process. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to list the three that I have read this weekend. And I'm thinking about doing bonus episodes on this podcast as well that are recaps of my takeaways from books. And I'll warn you ahead of time, I will be critical. But the three books that I read this weekend are Blue Fishing by Steve Sims, which I already mentioned. $10 million Leads from Alex Hermosi. That's actually his second book. His first book is $10 million Offers. I have not read that one. I'm one of our focus areas right now in my business is lead generation and really looking at our lead sources and things like that. So I skipped $10 million Offers. I also never followed Alex Hermosi. I did not know him. This was my introduction to him. Anyways, mix of opinions, but really good book, but mix of opinions there. And then actually, I'm going in reverse order because the first one that I read this weekend was Start With Why by Simon Sinek. So those are the three
yes.
books that I have read. I think there are probably recaps and takeaways coming about all three of those, but I'll go ahead and put it out there. And I will say, when you read something, just like we were talking about our filters and coaching and marketing and making decisions about all the things you do in your life in this conversation, I'm a big advocate for take what you want, leave the
Yeah.
rest. Take what you want, leave the rest.
Yes.
And if it's somebody that you already know you don't like, but everyone keeps on telling you, read this book, read this book, read this book, because I'm not going to spoil, but one of those three was one of those for me. I know I don't like the person, but I read it anyway. And because it was recommended so many times over the years. And I will say, going into it with an open mind of why do so many people I love and trust love this? There's
Hmm.
something to learn here. And also, you don't have to take all of it. You don't have to take all of it. It's okay. It's okay to say, that's where there's some problems, but this is what's great about it. And this is what I can use. So that's where I'm going. So anyway, those are the three that I've been reading, but I will update you with more. And I just put an ask out on social media for more recommendations. So I'm just hungrily consuming all these business books and yeah, practicing my filtering for sure, as we talked
I
about.
love that. And with that in mind, so one of the, like when I was reflecting on what we would talk about, I wrote down the words, we get to decide, we get to change our minds, and we get to make it our own. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I absolutely love when you're like, oh, I read this book and I fundamentally disagree with it. And what was the point? I'm like, the point is that even if you didn't have the takeaway that you hoped, you were able to get stronger in your own stance.
Yep.
There's always a win or learn. There's always an opportunity in it.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you try something, the trial and error part that we talk about as business owners, we have this idea, everyone says, hey, try it. You're like, okay, got to start somewhere. And then you're like, wow, I do not like courses. That's a learn, and it's a really important learn that helps
Yeah.
you establish a better, more informed choice next time. So yeah, take what works, leave the rest, and be good with it.
And to be fair, I did not hate any of those books. I did not.
Right.
I actually liked all of them. I have criticisms of
Sure.
all three, but that's fair. We're not the same person. We're two totally separate people. And honestly, they're all men. We're going to just be different inherently in certain ways. And that's a good thing, actually. Diversity is great. So I think, I just really, I live by it. Take what you want and leave the rest. Take what you want and leave the rest. As long as it's legal, take what you want and leave the rest. And
good caveat.
Yeah. But and sometimes even when things are legal or illegal, that doesn't mean that they're right and wrong. So that's also an interesting thing to interrogate. But I think it just all comes back to interrogation. So there you go. Another can of worms with the very last couple seconds of this podcast episode. But thank you so very much, Lisa, for your time and your wisdom. And I just appreciate you so much, and your friendship. I just appreciate you so much. And I'm glad to have you in my life. And I'm glad to get to share you with the Big Brave Business community.
Thank you so much. It is truly my pleasure. And I will come back anytime. All those cans of worms we open, I will keep digging through them with you.
And all the ones we have yet to open. If you already have a podcast, but you're feeling stuck or frustrated because nobody's really listening, or you just wish more people were listening, or you want to figure out how to start making some money from your podcast, whether that's through sponsored ads or any other form of monetization. By the way, did you know there's other forms of monetization? That is exactly the kind of thing that my team at Podfox Media can help you achieve. You can schedule your strategy session with us today at helpmyshow.com. That's helpmyshow.com. Schedule a session and I'll see you there.